Welcome to Babes in Bookland, your women's memoir podcast. I'm your host, Alex Franca. What if caring for someone at the end of their life could actually be a gift? Today, I'm talking with Alexandra Grabbe, author of the memoir, Seeing Joy, a story of life, death, and what comes next. Hi, Alexandra. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here with you.
I thought that your memoir was lovely and refreshingly honest about an extraordinarily difficult situation. Caring for a parent at the end of their life can be full of unexpected twists, moments, admissions. You write about your mother's visitors, people from her past, the joy in seeing them and the truth they inspire, while you yourself juggle the physical, emotional, and mental toll of caring for and helping usher your mother to whatever is next, while also running a bed and breakfast and being a wife and being all the things. I think a lot of people will resonate with your experience and feel less alone in their own thoughts and feelings. But regardless of where we are in our own lives, caring for our parents or our children or a partner, or maybe even just ourselves, your memoir gives us all permission to sit with how we feel, with the unknowns, with the difficult moments, and most importantly, see the joy.
That's a beautiful way of putting it. Thank you.
Before we get into the memoir, let's talk about the process. I was so happy to discover that this started as a blog. You blogged in real time as you were caring for your mother. Talk to me a little bit about why you decided to sit down and write the blog, and then why and how it became your memoir.
Well, I started the blog because I wanted friends and family to know how my mother was doing, because she was 96, which is a grand old age. I had really no experience in caregiving, so I was sort of discovering it by writing about it online in my blog. And what was really surprising was that, of course, family members were following the blog, but strangers started following, and they would leave comments. They were so enthusiastic, and they said, please keep going. This is so meaningful to us. We're doing the same thing, and so forth. This was early on in 2006 when blogs were the thing to do. It was brand new. Mm-hmm. It was, before Substack and all that. And so that was very rewarding to realize that what I was writing meant something to people.
Was there ever a moment of hesitation where you were like, ooh, do I want strangers to know about this? Or was it just purely joy in connecting?
No, it was joy in connecting, and also the idea that I could help them, that, they would take something from what I was writing. And then what happened is that someone who actually called herself a fan, she suggested turning it into a book.
Okay.
And I had not thought of that in the beginning. So I started thinking more and more along those lines.
Talk to me about how that went about. Blogging is obviously one way of writing. That's a writing style. And then, transforming it into a memoir. What did you have to do to sit down and do that?
Well, it was a really long process because my mom passed away in November of 2006. Immediately started thinking about turning it into a book. But I really didn't know what I was doing at that point. Mm-hmm. It was a little bit challenging. I think I wrote to 100 agents. Mm-hmm. There was an agent who had quite a good reputation, and she wanted to represent me. So I was so happy. But what happened that I didn't know is having an agent represent you doesn't necessarily mean your book is going to be published, because all of the editors that she knew were afraid of the topic of death. They just simply didn't want to touch it, because this was in 2008. Okay. They felt that it wouldn't sell. They're always thinking in terms of what will sell. So that was very disappointing to me, as you can imagine. Mm-hmm. So I sort of put the manuscript away for a while, and I'd go back to it from time to time. And then one of the agents had mentioned that it was too much like a blog. So I took that tip and I worked at making it less like a blog, shall we say. And then maybe I'd say 10 years later, around that, I decided to consult a developmental editor who was Mira Bartok, who wrote The Memory Palace. Okay. And she suggested that I should get the reader out of the bedroom, that too much was in the bedroom, which was a wonderful suggestion. Mm-hmm. And I really took it to heart. by that time, I had discovered and had time to go through some of the letters that my mother had written because she always kept everything. And in the back of her closet, I discovered an autobiographical novel that she had written but never published.
Mm-hmm.
So then I thought, well, maybe I need to add more vignettes from our life together over the years, as well as adding a few excerpts from her novel. And gradually, what I had written transformed into something completely different
Mm-hmm.
from the first manuscript that I had submitted to the agent
Mm-hmm.
and that had been refused. So that was sort of exhilarating to feel like, oh, this is right now.
Yeah. And you had to give yourself that time and space to be able to let it transform and change into what it now is. When
Yes.
you wrote the blog, I didn't get a chance to go through all of it. Were you as upfront about your feelings, or was it more about just the day to day, this is how mom's doing?
I think I was very upfront about what was going on
Mm-hmm.
because I wanted people to share it with me.
Yeah.
But I mean, I was thinking at first that it was just friends and family.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that I was very honest in what I was experiencing and what my mother was experiencing.
Okay. So that wasn't something that you added. I think that's really interesting that you had the foresight to provide that in your blog too, because I think nowadays people are a little bit more willing and open to share the harder feelings and the harder parts. But I feel like in 2006, like everything was still so shiny and happy and perfect. So your blog must have really been one of the
Yeah.
first ones that was like, let me tell you how this really is. I can love my mother and also kind of be waiting for her to die because living in this limbo is a really difficult thing. And I don't know how to do it. You know, how can we know how
Right.
to do that?
Well, you learn as you go along.
I guess you have no other choice, huh? Talk to me about that feeling when they said, okay, Alexandra, we're going to publish this.
Well, that was very exciting, and I can tell you how that happened. I was organizing a book fair here in Arlington, where I live outside Boston, and one of the authors, whom I didn't know, I purchased some of the books that were available at the book fair. She published. She was an author who had published Randy Susan Myers. She had published with the traditional Big Five, but she decided that that takes so long. She didn't want to do that, so she went with an independent press, and she recommended this independent press, which is named Kohler Books. So I contacted them, and right away they were interested.
Mm.
And that's how it happened.
And do you feel like you had more say in the creative process of picking the title or picking the picture, the painting that's on the front of the book?
Well, there was no challenge about the title at all.
Okay.
I was very grateful that the designer came up with I had sent the portrait of my mom, which some people don't realize that's a portrait of my
Mm-hmm.
mom. And it's mentioned in the memoir.
Mm-hmm.
And I had sent the portrait and I'd said that I imagined something with stars, but I couldn't really, I'm not a designer, so I didn't know where the stars should go or anything.
Yeah.
And the designer, the actual painting is more grayish,
Mm-hmm.
and she made the cover sort of brownish with the stars that really stand out.
Mm-hmm.
So I was really very pleased with the way that turned out.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I was wondering why you did decide to go with the portrait, which I definitely remember reading in the memoir, instead of a photograph.
Well, it was never a question of using
Okay.
a photograph,
Okay.
actually.
You just knew in your heart this was it.
I knew in my heart that that was what should be on the cover.
And then talk to me about finding the phrase seeing joy, because your blog was called
By Bee's
By
Bedside.
Bee's Bedside. Yes. Okay.
And for like 15 years, I thought of it in my mind as By Bee's Bedside.
Yeah.
When I was, I wasn't working on it all the time because I had a job. I was running a bed and breakfast, but I would go in from time to time and fiddle with it. So it came about that one day I went into my mom's bedroom the way I always did. And I was sort of in a hurry because I had a million things to do. And I realized that something was going on that was unusual. And she was looking up at the ceiling. And I realized that I'd interrupted a conversation she was having with someone,
Right.
but no one was there. And she's the one who said, I see joy.
Mm.
So that's where the title came from, that she was seeing joy. And I thought that was a wonderful idea.
It's a good juxtaposition to this really kind of difficult, dark, end of life thing that editors don't want to touch. Like maybe the end of someone's life isn't this scary thing that we all are associating, it to be. Maybe it's something that can be beautiful and joyful. And I think that's what your memoir lends to us. That's the experience and perspective. That doesn't mean that it was always easy, which is why I really appreciate your memoir, but that doesn't mean that it takes away from the joy. So let's
No.
get into it. Your memoir is obviously focused on your mother, but you mentioned your father, and he was the reason that you came from France. You were living in France, and you came home, and that's why you started the bed and breakfast. Walk me through just the kind of that first transition.
Well, my husband and I moved back from France in 97, and my dad he was 95, and he was obviously at the end of his life. And I decided that my husband was working. My husband is Swedish, and he was working in France, and he had like 10 years he needed to finish in France to be able to have his retirement. So I was very fortunate that at that time in 97, he agreed to accompany me to the United States, which was a total, adventure for him.
Sure.
And, live in the United States and get a fiance visa before we got married and move. So we did that. And we took care of mostly my dad at that point, but he was still mobile. And like we'd have lunch together, and dinner together. And I'd cook, and my dad loved everything that I made him, cooked him French dishes. He was delighted by that. He passed away in 99.
Okay.
So then it was just my mom, and my mom was still going strong. She was, taking courses at the library, and she'd go into town with her walker, and, she was very vibrant still. And that went on for a number of years. So, when you consider that the period that I'm writing about in the memoir is 2006, that's a long time where we were living in the house with her. In the beginning, we were living in a cottage nearby. And then she said she didn't really like to be alone. So could we come and move into the big house with her? So we did that. And it was a little bit challenging because my mom was intellectual and my husband is also intellectual. So they had a great time chatting at the dinner table. Not always things that I totally understood, but because he was a history teacher, so he knew a lot of things that interested her, and she knew a lot of things that interested him. So that worked out really well.
Mm-hmm.
So then it wasn't until February of 2006. She wasn't sick at all, because frequently when you have this type of memoir, somebody usually has cancer.
Right.
She wasn't sick. She wasn't ill. She had bursitis of the knee that sent her to the hospital. So she was in the hospital for I want to say maybe 5 days. And then I was told that she would be going to a rehabilitation center. So she was sent to a rehabilitation center. At the rehabilitation center where she was for maybe 2 weeks, she failed at rehabilitation. I don't know if she decided, I don't want to do this or what it was, but she did not get rehabilitated. And so the idea was that she was going to be bedridden from then on.
Right.
So it was quite interesting because I was asked to come into the office of the person in charge of this rehabilitation center because they had a wing that was for nursing as well. The woman said to me, now we can move your mother into the nursing wing if you want. And I immediately knew I didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
I hadn't had much experience with nursing homes. I'd been to a nursing home in Sweden where my husband's mother was staying, and after that, when I came back to the U.S., I had explored some nursing homes, just sort of walking through them, and I just didn't want to do that to my mother. So I decided right then and there, no, we'll take her home. She wants to be home, and we will help her to live and hopefully die with dignity. So that's what we did.
And so your mother never explicitly said, I don't want to be in a nursing home.
No, I just knew, but she also said she wanted to be home. This is what everybody wants. People want to stay in their homes usually.
Of course, if that's an option. You have siblings, correct?
I have a brother.
So when your father first needed someone to come care for him, why was it you?
Well, my brother lives in Western Massachusetts. He had already caregiving situation with his wife because one of their children had Down syndrome.
Okay.
So it wasn't a question of him doing it. And also, I think frequently it's the daughters who assume
It
this
is
role.
Frequently, but sometimes I think we just have to ask ourselves why.
Yeah. That was why it just seemed like the normal thing. And it worked out for us because I had been wanting to move back to the United States for many years.
Okay.
And my husband was curious about living in the United States. And Cape Cod, who wouldn't want to live at Cape
I
Cod?
know it sounds dreamy and beautiful. And so this entire time that your mother's living with you, the home, the big house is a bed and breakfast as well. There are people coming in and out.
Not the whole time. That
Okay.
that started in 2004, and we did it for like a dozen years.
Okay. What was the thought process behind that?
After my dad passed away, I had gotten a job. I guess it was before he passed away. I'd gotten a job at town hall where I was working as some kind of secretary, planning board secretary. And then after that, I heard about a job working as an assistant to a famous author who lives in Wellfleet.
Okay.
So I worked for her for 2 years. And then I decided that I was going to spend time editing my dad's memoir.
Yes.
I edited my dad's memoir because he had published, my mom had worked as an editor. She was a professional woman,
Okay.
and she had worked as an editor for a number of years. And so she helped him because I didn't mention that, but he was from Russia. He was Russian.
Hmm.
She participated in this book, but it was just the beginning of his life. It was his childhood and his escape from Russia at the revolution, which is a fascinating story.
Hmm.
But he also had written about 4 years that he spent in Denmark and then coming to the United States, and his story of being a miner and in a silver mine in Colorado, and trying to write a screenplay. Actually, I think he did participate in a screenplay in Hollywood. And he was teaching himself English at the same time because
Wow.
he spoke French and Russian, but not English.
Mm.
So anyway, yeah. So I published his memoir. It's called Emigre, 95 Years in the Life of a Russian Count.
I found it on Amazon, so it's on Amazon. We'll link that. I want to get back to you opening the bed and breakfast. You open this bed and breakfast, and at any point when your mother comes home after failing rehabilitation, is there a moment when you're like, all right, we need to not invite people into our home? Did that thought ever cross your mind, or no? Was it something that you guys kind of needed the income, so you just had to make it work?
Well, she was very social, so she liked the idea of it being a bed and breakfast. And, if I could have brought the guests in to meet her, she would have been really
Yeah.
happy because she was very talkative and she loved to explore what other people were like.
Hmm.
Um, but, I refrained from doing that. And I would worry because her bedroom was under one of the suites. And sometimes when she was awake in the middle of the night, I was afraid she'd wake up the guests and they wouldn't want to come back. But that never happened. So that was good.
Did you have to do a lot of work to the house to get it transformed into a bed and breakfast?
After my mom passed away, we did renovation.
Okay. Okay.
And so we created, because in Wellfleet, you're allowed to have three rooms.
Hmm.
Um, you can have more, but there all kinds of details are required.
Okay.
So we just stayed with three. And so we renovated, creating a room with a private bath where, that's what people are interested in. So,
Yes, yes. Okay. Very, very
but that's
cool.
the type of thing you learn as you go along.
Right, right. Getting back to your father's memoir, that seems like such a beautiful opportunity, knowing your family history, having your father tell this really fascinating and incredible story. That was a gift that I think he gave you and your family. And it seems like you were able to receive that gift from your mother and also give us the gift of your mother and her life. That was one thing that I was really struck about as I was reading it. These things that you were learning and discovering about your mom that you might have never discovered had you not had this experience with her. Kind of some big, big things.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I knew, like, for instance, that she had had an abortion, and I had never spoken to her about it. I knew about it because she had told my daughters. She had spoken with my daughters when I wasn't there.
Hmm.
So there was the opportunity. I could see that she was willing to talk. And so I asked her about it and what it was like and how it happened and so forth when she was 25, I think,
Right.
and living in New York, and how she'd found a doctor who was willing to do an abortion and so forth. So that was one thing that I had never dared to ask her.
Sure.
So I found out all about that. And it was also, you don't really think about learning about your parents' life before you're born.
Hmm.
And so there was all of that to discover too, what it was like growing up in Montclair, New Jersey.
Hmm.
And she was very determined. She was the first member of her family to go to a college, and she took an extra, I don't know if it was a year or a half year, but at a private school that would help her get into Vassar.
Okay.
So that was quite enterprising of her.
Right. It feels like you got to experience your mother not as just your mother, but as a woman
Mhm.
living her own
Absolutely.
life. And so, how has that impacted you when it comes to sharing yourself with your children?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think people wait for questions, and if there aren't questions, they don't necessarily provide the answers. So I know that with one of my daughters, she did ask questions, and I was very honest with her because I had divorced her father.
Hmm.
So she wanted to know about that. And so I explained to her all my reasons and so forth. But in general conversation, that you have to find the right moment,
Sure. Yeah.
and that was the same with my mother. At some other time, I might not have been able to talk to her about the abortion.
Right. Yeah. It was just kind of this thing that presented itself. Yeah.
Exactly.
What was your relationship like with your mother growing up and then before this experience happened? Because it seems like you guys had quite the transformation in this short period of time.
Well, she wasn't the easiest person to have as a mother. For one thing, after I was 5, she went back to work. And when I was an adolescent, she wanted to participate in my life. So, how she saw participating in my life, since she was an editor, she wanted to help me with my essays, which
Okay.
is not necessarily something that when you're an adolescent you want.
Right.
And she also had distinct ideas of whom I should date. This young man was the perfect person to have over to dinner, which she actually did sometimes, was invite random people.
Knock, knock, knock. Alexandra,
Yeah,
open the door. Oh my
yeah.
gosh.
So, that wasn't easy. And then when I moved to Europe, I married a Frenchman and moved to Europe in '69, I think. And her therapist told her that I had moved to Europe to put an ocean between us. No, I fell in love. So she wasn't always easy. And it's really interesting because my brother had a very different reaction to her.
Hmm.
He did not react the same way. Maybe she did not try and interfere. Maybe she learned with me what to do and what not to do,
Hmm.
but she behaved differently with my brother.
And what's the age gap between you and your brother?
3 years,
Okay, so not too much, but
not too much.
you were a young woman, and I can only imagine the pressure she felt as an enterprising woman of that time. We all still feel pressure to be perfect, and as women, we have to jump 10 feet higher when, all that still exists, but I can't imagine kind of being at the forefront of that and how that would affect her mothering, especially a young girl. It seems like her being a working mom did have a fairly large impact on you. You wrote about how you knew from a young age that you did not want to do that. You were missing a connection or time and attention from your mom. And so you knew, I'm not going to be that type of mother. I want to be a stay-at-home mother for as long as I can, or a more present mother.
Absolutely. Well, she wasn't there, when if there would be a crisis, she wasn't there. And so that really made me decide. I mean, I can remember in particular, there was a dog fight, and I had to rescue our dog and, was bitten. And what could I do? Well, I could talk to her over the
Right.
phone. And, that just was not satisfactory to me. So I just said to myself, I'm not going to do this to my
Yeah, and you
children.
write about that. I'm guessing that's something that you added during the From Blog to Memoir section. But were there any good qualities that you can pinpoint?
Well, she was a very loving mother, and I think I was able to behave the same way
Hmm.
with my children.
So when she was there with you and present, you did feel her love.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Do you feel though that when you were caring for her, were there any moments of closure or was there an aspect of her needing to apologize?
I didn't really because, she did her
Yeah.
best. And that's after having been a mother myself, that's all a mother can do is
Yeah.
do her best. And, sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But, I didn't expect her to apologize.
She starts having these visitors. You call them ghosts at some point. They're kind of ghost-ish.
Well, when I used the word ghost, it was actually in jest, because there is
Yeah.
humor in the book. And I was talking to my husband about it. This is really funny. Look what's happening. There are ghosts in the next room,
Yeah.
something like that. And I guess I was more open to this type of thing than a lot of people might be because I had an experience in France. I had a boyfriend, former boyfriend, who had passed away. And you know the feeling that when you know people really well and you feel like somebody's coming up
Hmm.
behind you, but you know it's your daughter and not your
Hmm.
son or something. And I knew that this was this former boyfriend's spirit that was there in the room. And it didn't last long, but it was like he'd come to make sure I was okay and he wanted me to know that he was okay. That was the message I
Yeah.
received. So, this is a really, really, really unexpected, weird thing to happen
Yeah.
to you. So I got on the phone and I called my mother, and she said, "Oh, you better get a therapist and quick."
Oh no. Little did she know.
Not at all. So when this started happening in her bedroom, at first she was terrified, and I'd find her hiding under the covers,
Hmm.
and I'd say, "What's going on?" And she'd tell me about the people who had been there.
Hmm.
At first, it was not distinct people that I recognized
Hmm.
as someone she knew or had known rather. But little by little, it became very distinct. And like there was her sister who came back a lot.
Hmm.
Her older sister, she had two sisters. And this was her elder sister who was there frequently.
Hmm.
And her father came and her grandmother came, and two roommates were frequently visitors.
Hmm.
So she would tell me, and she'd say what they were wearing, and it was very strange. So I would just listen,
Yeah.
talk to her about it, and I eventually started writing things down because it was so incredible what was going on.
Right. It was so specific. It seemed like sometimes there were almost like dinner parties but then sometimes it would be like one person, but all very intimate and all very real. I mean, very real, at least from when I was reading it. I believed it.
So when you would hear what she was saying, like I can remember there was one time when she was playing bridge, and I couldn't really, for a long time, I was trying to figure out what was going on. And she was playing bridge, obviously, with some people in her room, but there was nobody in her room.
Right.
It was very strange.
But your father never came, but you had the psychic come. Walk me through that.
Well, my father came at the very
Okay,
end.
that's right.
He was the last visitor. He and her beloved grandmother.
Mm,
They were the very last visitors who came to her. Yeah, well, that was my husband's idea. He thought that, it would be interesting to know how long we had to stay there because, when we had moved back from Europe, we had a bucket list of places we wanted to go and things we wanted to do. And
sure.
we honestly did not think that my parents would live both to be 97. So that came as a surprise.
Right, right. And so the psychic comes, sort of tells you, buckle in, she's going to be here for a while longer. And you're like, okay, great. How are you emotionally navigating that?
Well, sometimes not so well.
Yeah.
And depending on how long we had been there, towards the end, it was much harder because she was more demanding. Her circadian rhythm
Hmm.
tanked. And so she would, stay awake for 3 days, and I would be called into her room regularly,
Yeah.
and then she'd sleep for 3 days. So that was really exhausting because I also had to keep doing the bed and breakfast all this time.
Right, right. Did you have someone working with you that would help you clean the rooms, or was it all you? And you were cooking, you were providing maybe like a continental breakfast situation and then dinner? What were you doing?
I was cooking breakfast, and but my husband was helping me. He wasn't doing the cooking, but he was helping me with the cleaning
Hmm.
and just sort of the general chit chat with the guests and things like that.
Hmm. You ran it together.
Yeah, and we didn't have that many guests because there were only three rooms.
Okay.
So
So it's manageable.
yeah.
And you likened taking care of your mother to taking care of like a newborn or a toddler, which I laughed because I'm just sort of out of that phase. I have a 3-year-old as well. It still happens in the middle of the night. So I felt exhausted with you.
It was kind of strange because my son, who's actually in Los Angeles, and his wife had just had a baby, first grandchild.
Yeah.
So he would send me emails about his life taking care of a baby, and I would send him emails about my life taking care of my elderly mother.
Was that like a bonding experience for you and your son a little bit?
Well, we've always been very close, so it was, and he had lived for a long time with my mother in summer because he had summer jobs on
Okay.
Cape Cod, and so he knew her very well, and he was, very grateful that I was taking care of her.
Let's talk a little bit more about this caregiving aspect of it. I mean, you don't hold back. You share the physical toll, I mean, and the worries like checking your mother for bed sores and understanding your limitations, trusting the people that came into your home. Luckily, it seemed like because of medical insurance, that was all paid for and covered, or was any of that kind of coming out of your pocket or your mother's
Yeah, it was
pocket?
covered by Medicare.
Okay.
And, we were really fortunate because so my mom had the bursitis, I think, in February and came home towards the end of March. And immediately in April, her doctor recommended hospice.
Hmm.
So we had hospice from April. So the whole 7 months that I wrote about in the memoir, I did have someone coming in Monday through Friday. And then when they saw that I was also running a bed and breakfast, they were very sweet and said, well, you need more help on the weekend. We'll send someone as well.
Okay.
So there was someone who would come for an hour every day. That was just wonderful. I learned so much from the hospice workers.
Hmm.
We were really fortunate to have
It
them.
wasn't just caring for your mom, like her physical state, but I loved hearing the way that they treated your mom. I think it was particularly Lisa stands out as a character in your memoir who came in and she just seemed to bring this beautiful energy with her and she knew how to talk to your mom and I think that's a gift. I'm so glad people like that exist because this seems to be a really difficult job. I mean, helping people and helping the families as someone's dying, what were your favorite moments or like aspects of these caregivers?
Lisa was the main one. And then we also, when they added someone, we had someone whose name was Alice in Wonderland, which I thought was a wonderful name. But apparently she had changed her name. So she was Alice something else. But she was, it was like she went around with a wand and fairy dust was all over the
They were
room.
like little mini Mary Poppins, but for later in life.
Yes, we were really fortunate. And as you said, Lisa was amazing. So I've stayed in touch with her.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, because there were times where one of them would come in and they'd take a look at you and they'd say, go, get out of here. Like you need to decompress. Do you feel like you were able to give yourself permission to do that? Or did you need someone else to tell you, Alexandra, you're taking on so much?
Well, my husband was very helpful in that because, when he saw that I had, a little bit too much, he would say, well, how about we go for a walk at the beach?
Yeah.
We can go. We were really fortunate and wealthy because there's so many beautiful walks you can take. Being in nature, we'd walk through the woods to the ponds there, and that really helped. It really helped me to ground me and feeling the wind on my skin. And yeah,
Yeah, kind of help get you back to that more stable place to where you can go back in and take care of your mom the way that you wanted to take care of her. It was very obvious that you would sort of feel frustrated or overwhelmed or emotional about this experience, which makes so much sense. And then just like us as moms, we don't want to take that out on our children. So where's your outlet? How can you do that? I just loved that you included those experiences. And it seemed like your husband was also kind of navigating his own feelings. You bring up how he was sort of being reminded of the fact that he didn't really get to do this for his parents. There was a lot of emotions going on in this bed and
absolutely. And
breakfast.
he had lost his parents very close together. And then he also lost his brother who had pancreatic cancer. And it was like within 3 years, all three
Hmm.
who were in Sweden
Hmm.
while he was in the United States, they had all passed away. And so that was very
I thought
hard.
that was very generous of you to share that in your memoir too, because you didn't have to include that, but you were so just willing to kind of expose all of the nerve endings that were going on at this time. It's not just your story, it's your husband's as well. It's your mother's, it's a little bit of Lisa's, it's your children's. We're all affected by these experiences, and you just captured it all so beautifully. What was the most unexpected or surprising part for you about caregiving?
I guess that I knew so little.
Really? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, when I decided to do this, I really had no idea what I was doing,
Hmm.
which goes to show that anybody can decide to do it and learn as they go along.
Sure.
And I had no idea how rewarding it would be.
Mm.
That was a big surprise. And that was, mostly, I think, as the months went by when my mom had hospice towards the end of her life, that was when it really struck home to me what a privilege it was and how glad I was that I'd chosen to take care of her
Yeah.
because I was in touch with something that most people do not experience.
Yeah. Either because they're unable to or because maybe they're a little fearful of it.
Well, I think that these, I guess I'll call them spirits, I would call them invisible people when my mom was alive. It's something normal. And I didn't know that at the time. So I would ask the hospice people, and like Lisa would tell me that her grandfather had experienced the same thing.
Hmm.
And then I went and researched it in books, and I found something from 1918. I've forgotten the name of the book, On the Threshold of the Unseen or something, that was describing exactly what she was experiencing.
Yeah.
From reading more recent books by hospice nurses, there's several that are out now that are very good,
Hmm.
which didn't exist when I was doing this. But I learned that there's actually a term for this. It's called visioning.
Mm.
So I learned as I went along. That was a very, very special time.
It seems like it. Did you ever have moments where you stopped and you said, "Wow, I'm doing it"? Did you feel capable as you were doing it, or were you kind of building the plane as you flew it, and then at the end you were like, "Well, I did it."
Yeah, I did not think along those lines because I was too busy. I was still doing the bed and breakfast at the same time
Hmm.
and I was writing the blog, and then I started writing a blog about the bed and breakfast. So I was really busy all the time.
But you never had a moment where you kind of acknowledged that you were doing a good job. Did you feel like you were doing a good job as you were taking care of your mother?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think I knew, well, I knew that that was the right thing, that I'd made the right choice, that this was the right decision to have come back from Europe to take care of my parents,
Hmm.
and that it was meaningful and that I was giving them something that they would not have had if they had been in nursing homes. And it was a gift to me as well
Hmm.
to be able to experience this. I sort of equate it with like when I gave birth.
Mm.
It was very similar. It's at the end of life and giving birth. There's something similar that where you're touching something that most people don't experience. The visioning, as I understand it, in at least in the rehabilitation center where my mother was. I saw the attendants, the aides, distributing the pills. And so they give pills to stop the hallucinations. They call them hallucinations.
Hmm.
In the beginning, I called up my mom's doctor and I said, "This is what's happening." And he said, "Oh, well, I can prescribe something for that. She's having hallucinations."
Hmm.
And it wasn't really, I don't think of it as hallucinations. I think that's wrong.
Yeah.
I really prefer the visioning concept that the hospice nurses have these
It
days.
seemed like such a lovely thing for your mother. I mean, there were definitely times where she was overwhelmed or she wanted them to leave, be quiet. But I mean, if I get to that age and I get to re-experience people from my life that I had lost, I mean, please don't give me a pill to stop that, you know? Let's talk a little bit more about the tolls that you experienced. You've talked a lot about the gifts. I'm glad that you felt like it was the right thing to do, but you do write in your memoir that you sometimes weren't sure what the right thing was when it came to caring for your mom or like letting her believe this certain thing. And you do talk about this transformation that your mom had. She was very afraid to die because she didn't know what happened next, to finally feeling at peace from it and maybe having an understanding of what happened next.
Well, she thought that when you die, that's it. That's the end. So she was afraid to die, and she did everything in her anything possible to not die. That was her goal, that she wanted to stay alive. So it was, I think, a revelation for her at the end of her life.
I know it seemed like she was ready to die. And in fact, it seemed like she was ready to die. And then she was like, and now I'm not dying, like finally ready. Come on.
Yeah.
Did she say, "Oh, I think this happens now"?
No, no. It was clear at the end that she was ready, and she was at peace.
What do you think happens when we die?
Well, I don't really know, of course. But I think it's important that everybody be allowed to end as well as they possibly can
Hmm.
and die with dignity. when we talk about dying now, frequently we see so much murder, and now there's the war and people are dying. And that's just not the way people should be dying. It's
Yeah.
not right. I think when one has lived a long life, like with my mother, everybody says, well, were you grieving? Were you in mourning? And it was really the time for her to die. It was, at 97, it happened at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
And for me as well, because I had gotten to a point where I was really exhausted by what was going on. And the hospice nurse had told me that when, she'd start on these talking sprees about something that had maybe happened in the past, and maybe it hadn't happened in the past, maybe it was just in her imagination.
Mm-hmm.
But when she'd do this, then the hospice nurse told me to just play along.
Mm-hmm.
So I would do that with her and write it all down
Mm-hmm.
because I was conscious that, that was important. But it was trying. At the end, I was really exhausted.
Yeah, we felt that. So you feel like you didn't necessarily need to grieve your mother because you were able to walk to the finish line with her in this way.
Exactly.
Oh, that's really lovely. I mean, I think that's something that we could all hope for. I actually did an episode to start this season by the death doula.
I listened to it. Actually, I wasn't able to go to the End Well conference. There's a wonderful End Well conference. Actually, it's in LA, so you could go, but I couldn't go this year. I wanted to go, but I was able to go virtually. And she was there,
Mm.
and she's fantastic.
Yes, her book is amazing. And it is, I think there's so much fear around death because it is an unknown. None of us can experience what happens next, if anything happens next, and come back and be like, guys, it's okay. As human beings, I think we like to know what something is going to be like, and we like to prepare. And there are just some things you can't prepare for, but you can prepare your spirit for it, or your soul, or, your heart. And it seemed like you were sort of doing that simultaneously while also taking on the physical aspect and these other burdens and gifts that you experienced at these last few months of your mother's life.
Anyone who's in a similar situation, I really recommend having hospice. I mean, it's been 20 years now, so I don't know exactly how that
Yeah.
works, but it was such a help to
Mm-hmm.
us. And they had like a doctor and a nurse who came by pretty much every week or two to check on my mom. They also had a chaplain, so if she wanted to talk about things, there was the chaplain to talk with.
Mm-hmm.
So that was just fantastic. My husband is now at the end of his life, and so I know what he's going to be going through as well. It's a learning experience
Mm-hmm.
because this is not something that's taught in schools.
No, it's not. Yet it's something that we will all experience. So you're just kind of like, why do I need to know what a rhombus is? Why don't we all talk about death? And we used to. Death used to be a community event.
Absolutely.
One big thing that I took away from your book was the support that you had, whether it was with the hospice care team, your husband, nature. Nature did seem to be a big support for you. Yeah. My last question for you before we wrap it up, you talked a lot about these things that you found, your mother's manuscript, certain relics. What have you done with them now? Have you kept them? Are they out somewhere?
They're actually in a box. I have, my father with my mother, had written a book called Private World of the Last Tsar, because his father was very close to the last Tsar, and he was also an amateur photographer, so he'd taken lots of pictures. So I have all these boxes, labeled Dad and Mom. And so that is one of my projects, to go through them one of these days when I find the time.
One of these days. I'm looking forward to one of these days as well. Lots of projects. Alexandra, I loved chatting with you today. Is there a big takeaway that you want your readers to leave your memoir with?
Well, I think just to know that it's possible to do what I did. The circumstances in my life allowed it, and sometimes it's not possible. I know it's harder now because a lot of people in the sandwich generation are faced with these choices,
Yeah.
and that's not easy. If you have little children and an elderly parent, my God, just one elderly parent was enough for me.
Yeah.
So, but that just to know that it is possible, because nursing homes have gotten so outrageously expensive.
Yeah.
And it's something that is rewarding to do. In the beginning, I never thought that. When I started, I had no idea that would be my reaction.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm really, really glad that I did take care of my mom.
And I'm glad that you shared that experience with us in your beautiful memoir. I have two more questions for you. One is a question that I ask all of my authors. How do you stay hopeful today?
I'm an optimistic person.
Okay.
So I don't have to really struggle to be hopeful.
Mm,
Although what's going on in the world right now is definitely challenging because it just does not seem sensible or right. And that's very upsetting. But
yeah.
on the basis of my own situation, I remain hopeful. Right now I'm living apart from my husband because he's in a nursing home in Sweden, which costs $1,000 a month for the nursing home, the help, the food, everything. Whereas if he had something like that here, it would be like
Oh my
14,000
gosh.
in Boston. I'm going to see him. I go over and see him like 3 times a year, which is it's not easy because now I'm getting older too.
Yeah.
But we've been living this way for 3 years now because I tried to live in Sweden and they refused my request to live in Sweden, even though I've been married for 30 years and with him for 40
Oh my
years.
God.
Yeah. So here I am in the United States and my husband is in Sweden and we FaceTime every day. So,
Mm. Okay. So, yeah, you're living a challenging situation, but
but I remain hopeful.
you've been through so much. You've had women in your life go through so much and share that with you. I think sometimes we can build on the grit and resilience as our life goes and the hope as our life goes. And I'm so sorry. That just sucks. Dang
Yes,
it,
I know.
Sweden. You're good in so
It's
many ways. Let me in.
Yes, exactly. A progressive country, and they behave like this. It's very hard to understand. But thank you so much, Alex. It's been lovely chatting with you.
Alexandra, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I so enjoyed our chat and I really enjoyed your memoir. I'm going to link how to buy it so that everyone who listens to this can go to the show notes and buy it for themselves and meet B and learn more about your experience.
Thank you for what you do. It's a wonderful podcast you have.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Bye. Take care.
Bye. You too.
Thank you all so much for being here and listening. If you'd like to further support the show, please share this conversation with a friend or rate and review us wherever you podcast. You can also subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Patreon for extended episodes and bonus content. Next week, we keep the joy going when I sit down with author Cassidy Card about her memoir, Cosmic Goodness. It details her journey from a high-stakes television career to finding peace in Montana, surrendering perfectionism, and embracing spiritual synchronicity. It also explores healing from childhood trauma, conscious sobriety, and finding magic in everyday life after a pandemic-era burnout. Until then, take care.